Okay, I think we'll get started. It's just after 4 o'clock. I'm Rebecca Hubbard, Program Director for Owlfish. Thank you very much to everybody for joining us. We are, as we're all aware, in the midst of a planetary emergency with ecosystems which support human life under unprecedented pressure. Of these systems, the ocean is the biggest and is fundamental to each and every one of us. Our every second breath comes from the ocean. Without it, the atmosphere would be much hotter. And so better management of our relationship with the ocean is not just about fish hugging, it's about staying alive. Yet we're putting the ocean under enormous pressure. Even here in the EU, around 40% of our Northeast Atlantic fish stocks remain overfished. Over 80% of Mediterranean stocks are overfished, and many EU seas, most are assessed as in poor health. So we have to rise to this challenge. We need to make sure that the ocean is at the center of our solutions to the crisis, or else we risk irreparable damage, not just to the planet, but obviously to our own health. So thank you so much for joining us this afternoon. I'm going to hand over now to Adam Weiss, our very gracious moderator. Thanks, Adam.
Thanks, Rebecca. Welcome, everyone. My name is Adam. I am head of ocean at Client Earth, which is the environmental NGO that uses the power of the law to achieve systemic change for people and the planet. And it's my great honor to be moderating this impressive panel today. You should all be seeing right now a poll pop up in your window. Don't be too alarmed if it doesn't, because the poll function is compatible with all operating systems. But if you do see it, we'd love you to fill it out now before we get started. It will really help us understand your background knowledge and give you a taste of what you're in for. Just a few important points to maximize our short time together this afternoon. We will hear 3 presentations from our expert speakers and then have an open Q&A, and we'll finish at 5 p.m. Brussels time. You can type any question that you have into the Q&A function at the bottom of your screen. Please add the name of the presenter if you want to ask a presenter a specific question. There's a great function here, which is that if you agree with someone else's question, you can give it a thumbs up, and that will bump it up in the list of questions, which means that it's more likely to be asked during the Q&A time. There is also a separate chat, which you should feel free to use, but please keep in mind that the chat is not getting any responses. So if you have a question that you want to see addressed, please put it in the Q&A separately. One very important thing to say is that this session is being recorded, so please keep that in mind. And without further ado, please let me introduce the first of our 3 wonderful panelists. Our first panelist is Dr. Karina von Schuckmann, who is an oceanographer specialized in climate monitoring at Mercator Ocean in France, and is a lead author of the IPCC special report on the ocean and cryosphere in a changing climate. Dr. von Schuckmann has over 20 years research experience from GeoMar Germany, Ifremer France, and the Mediterranean Institute of Oceanography. She will present the central importance of a healthy ocean to a functioning climate and habitable planet. Dr. von Schuckmann, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, and thank you all for the interest in this webinar. So I will introduce the fundamental role of the ocean through 2 specific precise angles. The first one will be through the importance within the sustainable development and within the environmental change. So I'm starting with the role of the ocean within the Sustainable Development Goal era, which is on the UN Agenda 2030, and having here the SDG 14 dedicated SDG to the ocean at the center of the other 16 SDGs. So there are 2 lines of importance here. The first is to link to the interconnectivity of the different SDGs and the linkage to the specific ocean one. So I will deliver a broad line on why we have put in this work below the SDG 14 to the center of this framework. So the world ocean drives global systems and plays a fundamental role in the SDG framework because, first of all, it has two very strong characteristics. First is linked to its capacity to store huge amounts of heat and also, for example, carbon and other biogeochemical substances in the ocean. Today, it's taking up about 90% of anthropogenic heat, and it's also taking up 1/3 of carbon, anthropogenic carbon. Another characteristic of the ocean is that it can transport large amounts of this heat and also the carbon and other substances around large distances horizontally, but also into very deep layers of the ocean. Another environmental characteristic is that the ocean is a reservoir. It's a reservoir for oxygen we breathe. So about more than 50% of oxygen we breathe reside in the ocean. It's a reservoir for biodiversity. It's about 50% of global primary production reside in the ocean. And it's a reservoir for fresh water. So about 96% of fresh water reside in the ocean. On the society or economic pillar, there are others where we'll provide some examples, rough examples on which we highlight the importance of the ocean, which include ocean space. It's covering 71% of the Earth's surface. There's an important role in climate, but also on the weather phenomena and also extreme phenomena and the changes in sea level, important for the coast. It plays a very important role for food security, a specific topic of this seminar today, and also adaptation, mitigation, regional planning, and also sector for a sustainable blue economy and trade and shipping, etc. So these are some examples, and more work can be related here. Then this ocean, which is so important for our development, for our Earth, for humanity, is under threat. So I will draw here on 4 major specific changes observed and assessed in the last special report on the Ocean Cryosphere from IPCC: ocean warming, sea level rise, ocean acidification, and ocean deoxygenation. Ocean warming is the first topic I will present, and for all figures which are following the red line are the predictions which are proposed under strong greenhouse gas emission scenarios, and the blue one on 3 degrees greenhouse gas scenario. So ocean warming due to the emissions of heat trapping gas resulting from human activities, the global ocean is warmed, as it has taken up more than 90% of excess heat in the climate system, making climate change irreversible. Ocean warming is continuing undebated, and since the last 3 decades, the rate of ocean warming has increased, and around half of the total heat gain in the global ocean has occurred in the Southern Ocean over the last decade. And the climate models show that the ocean will continue to warm throughout the 21st century, with a specific increase 2 to 4 times more heat if it is limited to 2 degrees, and 5 to 7 times at giving higher scenarios shown here in the red line. Sea level rise. Sea level rise during the 21st century, the global mean sea level rose by about 15 centimeters. So what we observe today is 15 centimeters. And in comparison, what is predicted is that we would reach up at an accelerated rate of 1.1 meter in 2100 if the emissions are not sharply reduced, and would even go further up if by 2100 for higher scenarios. Ocean acidification. So the ocean, as mentioned at the beginning, has taken up 1/3 of the global emissions from human activities over the past 3 decades. And as a consequence of anthropogenic carbon uptake, the ocean has undergone increasing surface acidification, and continued carbon uptake by the ocean by 200-100 is virtually certain to exacerbate ocean acidification. And the loss of oxygen has occurred from the surface to 1,000 meters. And ocean oxygen is projected to further decline over the 21st century. I would like to close this webinar with a presentation on the importance of the role overall for everybody and at a global scale for our climate. Today, due to the changes in decomposition from human activities, there is a current Earth energy imbalance at the top of the atmosphere, meaning that less radiation is going out of the system than which is compared to what is coming in from solar radiation. This leads to accumulation of heat in the Earth system, and which is driving our global warming. Today, this accumulated heat in the system is stored in, on the Earth, different Earth components, from which the majority is stored 90% in the ocean. And the rest is going into melting the ice, the cryosphere, warming the atmosphere and land. And so I'd like to mention that this huge amount of 90% is a huge energy. And for example, maybe the small number for the cryosphere is meaning being up for 70% of global sea level rise today. Thank you for your attention. And if you have any questions, please do not hesitate to contact me. Thank you.
Thank you so much for that. That was a very interesting presentation, and it gives us a great background for the factual situation of what's going on and how it links in with the SDG framework. Thank you, Dr. von Schuckmann. I'd like to introduce our next speaker. Dr. Rashid Sumaila is Professor and Director of the Fisheries Economics Research Unit at the University of British Columbia Fisheries Center. He specializes in bioeconomics, marine ecosystem valuation, and the analysis of global issues such as fishery subsidies, IUU fishing, and the economics of high and deep seas fisheries. Dr. Sumaila has experience working in fisheries and natural resource projects across the globe, from Norway and Canada to Namibia, Ghana, Hong Kong, and the South China Sea. Dr. Sumaila, the floor is yours. Dr. Sumaila, I think you're muted.
All right.
Oh, we heard you for 1 second, but I think there you are.
I'm muted now, right?
Yes, no, yeah, I can hear you now. I think everyone else can.
You can, okay. Okay, there's always this little glitches at the beginning, right? Okay, so thank you very much, and thanks for everybody for coming. I know the opportunity cost of your time is very high, and you gave us 1 hour to share ideas about the ocean and how to sustain our ocean. So right off, I mean, the key point I want to make is that an ocean teeming with life, full of life, is also climate action. So this will be the theme I will develop in the next few minutes here. And just to, as a take-home message, just right at the beginning, number 1, we have a long history of really over-exploiting marine life, and that has consequences. The second point is that when we deplete our fish stocks, it's not only about the fish, it's also about us people, because one key fact is that when you don't have fish, you cannot have any fishery, right? The fisheries depend on the fish. And then there will be no fish jobs. There will be no seafood for those of us who enjoy seafood, and there will be no money to be made, actually. No dollars, no euros, no whatever coming from fisheries, you know. So it's crucial that we maintain this for the sake of the fish and for our sake. If you want to be a friend of fishers, or fishermen, or fisherfolk, you better be a friend of fish first, a friend of biodiversity first, because that's what it is based on. And ocean teeming with life, this is the main topic. It helps sequester carbon, as Karina has alluded to, and I'll be talking about. Fisheries management is therefore important. We have to manage how we take fish and how we even pump waste into the ocean. These are all connected. Climate change is a big one here. Less fishing effort means more catch, and this is contrary to many other sectors. If you don't fish too much, you have a booming ocean with lots of fish biomass. It's going to cost you less to catch the fish, and you can catch large, valuable fish, more delicious fish, and so on and so forth. So, and so, yeah, that's important to have in mind. And also, if you don't go out a lot with fishing boats, you are reducing your own contribution to CO2 and therefore climate change, which in the next one actually benefits you. Finally, a healthy fish is like a healthy person. If you have healthy fish biomass, they are more able to withstand shocks when they come. So big point, which is known to many of you online, but it's always good to reiterate and say it again. The ocean is 70% of our Earth's surface, and therefore, actually, some of us say maybe we should call it planet ocean, not planet Earth, because it's the majority, right? 70%. So it's too light to ignore. But it doesn't mean that it is too late to mess up or destroy, as we have the technology and the demand and the power to do it. At the same time, it also doesn't mean that it's too late that you cannot do anything to make sure it's sustained. We have the ability to actually maintain this large area. My favorite model is summarizes our relationship with the marine environment in a very simple way, but I think quite powerful way. Two things we do when we go to the ocean as people. Number one, we take all the stuff we really like. We take the fish and all the other valuable services we get from the ocean, take it into our economy, and then do what we do with it. And what do? We produce waste, and that goes into the ocean, whether it's CO2, whether it's other pollutant, debris, and so on and so forth. And if we don't do these two things wisely, we're going to destroy the source of all these amazing services to us and destroy biodiversity, which in itself is not something we want to do for the sake of future generations. Now, overfishing, I think this picture summarizes what we do to the ocean in terms of fishing. Number one, we take too much fish, more than nature can regenerate. That is overfishing right there for you. We take the big fish and valuable fish first, so we are truncating the marine food web, which is not a good thing because the food web is an integrated system. You need everybody, those who eat fish, those who are food for fish, and all the interconnections have to be in place for it to be healthy and continue delivering, right? If you take the top predators, you are actually truncating and causing trouble. The third thing is the habitat. If you look down on the x-axis, from the beginning at the origin, it's more rich. You have all the different types of habitats in there, and our equipment, the bottom trawlers and things we use actually go down to destroy the habitats. And without a home, there is no person. Without a habitat, there's no fish. So these are the three things. Take too much, truncate the ecosystem, and also mess up the habitat. All these go to make the fish really vulnerable. And this is not only about fish or biodiversity, it connects to people. So here you have the general trend we see. We start with a healthy ocean or water system, and we just keep doing what I just explained. And more we're fishing depleted, we're exploited, sometimes crash fish stocks. That is fish stocks where what we're taking now is less than 10% of the maximum we've taken before. Then you know you've really crashed the system. And this is a guy says, is that all the shrimp I get after all this work? And down here we have the lady there. That's an example of an environmental refugee. People are people everywhere. You don't sit down and die. When your livelihood is gone, you move. And this leads to forced migration with all its consequences that I don't need to even explain too much. So these have solid human consequences. And then we have climate change. Karina has really explained this very well. I mean, you have the warming, you have the let's see ice, acidification, deoxygenation, all taking place. And this, again, if you affect the physics and the chemistry of the ocean, you can be sure life in the ocean will be affected, whether at the level of the organism or the population, the community, and therefore the fisheries. But this is not a one-way traffic. If you also overfish, if your fish is too big for nature, that works back again, affects the fish stock, the communities, and aggravates the climate impacts. This is where the title of my talk comes from. What you do at the end also has consequences on climate change and our ability to deal with it. This picture here, I put here, you don't need to really read everything here. It just shows all the mechanisms through which a healthy ocean actually is also climate action. And there are at least 8 different processes identified here. You will get this slice if you are interested, so you can see it. I'm not expecting you to look, but there are so many mechanisms. One of them is the biomass of whales, for example. We talk about the whale pump. And the whales, their droppings catalyze a lot of, they are full of nutrients, so they kind of catalyze phytoplankton production, and that's one of the elements of the ocean that absorbs a lot of dissolved oxygen and therefore helps with sequestration. And there are all sorts of examples here. For example, when you talk about bony fish, right? The formation of their shells is carbon carbonate, and that helps to reduce the impact of ocean acidification, and so on and so forth. So this is a very powerful photo here, and I hope you get time to look at it and you see all the mechanisms through which the ocean, a healthy ocean, actually helps us to reduce. We did a little analysis of the high seas, and we compared the sequestration value of the fish in the high seas versus their catch value. And we came up with a 1 to 10. The carbon value is 10 times the catch value we get a year from the high seas, right? So that's the kind of stuff we are talking about here. What's the next one? Yeah. Come on. Yeah. All right. So this slide is all about what can we do, what do we do. Essentially, you've got to manage, you have to govern the ocean, we have to have rules and regulations, and we have to have policies and put up instruments to help us manage and make sure that we don't overdo things. And what I see through my career up to now is that a lot of the policies and actions we put in place actually create negative feedback from people to nature and nature to people. And I think that is unfortunate, because what we need to do with our policy is to put in policies and take actions that lead to positive feedback from people to nature and back. And what do I mean by this? I'll just use subsidies, for example. Our governments give subsidies to the fishing sector. $25 billion is the estimate, right, a year. And when we look deep into the amount, most of these subsidies, 80% goes to large-scale industrial. Only 20% goes to small-scale in fishing, where the communities are, where the food is needed, where they need help. So we give it to the big profit-maximizing sector and handicap the people who need the food. In my view, this is really negative feedback from nature to people, because people at the coast, if they need food, they will hang on the last fish. So that's the kind of thing I'm saying. We shouldn't do this kind of things if we want to sustain our ocean and therefore sustain our lives. And so in the last slide, essentially ending overfishing now would strengthen the ocean, making it more capable of withstanding climate change while contributing to actually reducing it through the many mechanisms I showed on that photo. A healthy person is more likely to survive an epidemic than a person who is less healthy. I don't need to say much about this. We are in a pandemic, and we all know the consequences if you have pre-existing conditions, what happens to you if you get it versus if you don't. Therefore, fish are like people, actually. They have life like we have. And the more the populations are healthy, the more they are able to withstand all shocks. And in this way, people and fish are actually not different. People in the ocean are not, right? And that is what I will leave you with. Thank you very much for your attention, and we'll take questions when the time comes.
Thank you so much, Dr. Sumaila. That was very, very helpful, and it's wonderful how accessible you make it in helping us think about the health of fish like the health of people. I particularly appreciate the idea that we might call it Planet Ocean and not Planet Earth, particularly because I work in the ocean program of Client Earth, so I may suggest to my colleagues that we rename the organization Client Ocean.
Fantastic.
I'll move on now to our third speaker, who is Rebecca Hubbard. Rebecca is the program director of Our Fish, which is a European campaign working to end overfishing and restore a healthy ocean ecosystem in order to address the biodiversity and climate crisis. Rebecca, the floor is yours.
Thanks, Adam. Thanks very much. And thanks everybody for joining us. Indeed, our fish works across the EU, primarily on ending overfishing, but actually because we really believe that a healthy ocean is critical for everybody, not just for fish and fishing. First slide, thanks. So all of the signs that the natural world is giving us right now, unfortunately, are not good. The natural world, which gives and maintains human life, is really warning us that we're hurtling towards a collapse of mighty proportions. Of course, we're suffering, and the effects of COVID have been horrendous. But looking at the big picture, we've got some really, really big crises in front of us, not least, as Karina explained, and Dr. Sumaila, in terms of from the IPCC report, but also from the Intergovernmental Panel on Biodiversity and Ecosystem Services report last year, from the European Environment Agency's report, Marine Messages 2, earlier this year. We're basically hearing from all of the experts that we're pushing our ocean ecosystem, the heart, lungs, and circulatory system of the planet, to the edge of burnout. And we really need to stop before things get really serious and irreversible. So luckily, there are some things that we really think are very, very achievable. And so what, yes, next slide, excellent. So what we're looking to do here is, as our fish, we're part of a civil society movement, but we work with lots of other stakeholders as well. But what we're really calling on is the EU governments and decision makers, both in Brussels at a commission level, at a commissioner level, and in the EU member state governments, to give their support to the proposed biodiversity strategy that was released for 2030, but also to give it a boost. What we really want to see is that the ocean, and fish as the lifeblood of the ocean, are given the recognition that they need, and also given the action that they deserve. So there are a few key things that we can do with fish and fisheries that will help to restore ocean health, and that are really achievable, and that will ensure that fish and fisheries, the fishing industry, but fisheries management actually contributes and shares the responsibility, like we all have. We all have a responsibility to act in this crisis. So we're looking to EU governments, firstly, to reinforce commitments made. So if we can move to the next slide. We have a number of existing EU laws that are actually quite good, but they haven't been implemented. And if we implemented them already, then we would really make a huge progress in terms of restoring ocean health. So we're really looking to see existing EU laws like the Common Fisheries Policy and the Marine Strategic Framework Directive implemented. And we're also looking to the Commission and to our governments to enforce the do no harm principle. So this is a new principle that was introduced with the EU Green Deal. And it essentially says, we're going, the commitment of the EU is to change our relationship with nature, to stop making the biodiversity crisis work, and to become climate neutral. And to do that, we need to make sure that everything does no harm. It actually improves things. And it's a great principle, but it really needs to be enforced. So it's our view that that should be enforced, and that if where it's not, a lack of compliance should result in a withdrawal of financial support. Basically, we have to stop propping up bad behavior, as Rashid said before. Next slide. We need EU governments to rise to the climate crisis, and also to mitigate the climate impacts of fishing. So as I think Dr. Sumaila really pointed out really clearly, restoring fish populations has a number of benefits, not just biodiversity, not just for fish, not just for fishing, but for the ecosystem and the functioning of the ecosystem. And we really need to start setting precautionary fishing limits that incorporate climate buffers and never exceed scientific advice. We have a law that says we would end overfishing by 2020 in the EU. And basically, whilst we haven't made it yet, things are not going to get easier. Each year, it's actually going to get harder, not just because overfishing makes it harder next year, but because climate, compounding impacts with climate are going to make things harder. So we need to draw a line in the sand here, and we also need to actually start incorporating a bit more precaution into the scientific advice as well. We need to boost the marine carbon storage, coastal protection, and resilience of the ocean and coastal marine habitats by protecting them and restoring them and improving their integrity. These habitats have huge potential to both store carbon, but also protect our coastal communities from worsening climate impacts like storm damage and the impacts of sea rise and whatnot. So we really need to actually protect those, map those and protect them. And it's quite incredible what's already been mapped and what's possible. We need to reduce CO2 emissions by removing fuel tax subsidies. Nobody should be paid to pollute anymore. And there are, fuel tax subsidies can really make a huge difference, and they are public money that is currently going to worsen CO2 emissions. So nobody should be paid to pollute. So we really need to remove those, and that can happen through the review of the Energy Taxation Directive that's happening right now. We need to recognise and support ending destructive overfishing as climate action as well. So this really needs to be in our climate laws, and it really needs to be acknowledged in the nationally determined contributions that are developed through the IPCC and the UNFCCC process with climate. Next slide, please. And as I think was really clear from both Dr. Sumaila and Dr. von Schuckmann, we really need to restore the ocean ecosystem health because it works as a system. So we have some particularly damaging activities that are still going on, even in our most protected, our most special or vulnerable and valuable areas. So we need to establish trawl-free zones and limit or ban these destructive gears, because it's just making things a lot worse. We need to commit to ambitious ocean protection of at least 30% of marine protected areas with a focus on biodiversity protection, and make sure that they're managed well. This is purely following the best science of the IUCN and internationally, and is not in any way surprising, but we really need some animo, as you would say in Spanish. We really need some get-go behind that one, because it's been coming for a long time, or it's been aimed for a very long time. And it's just like ending overfishing, it's taking way too long. And we need to incorporate scientific advice for ecosystem and climate indicators. So at the moment, the EU is just managing fisheries species by species. And even then, we're overfishing. We still have around 40% of Northeast Atlantic fish stocks overfished, 80 more, 90% in the Mediterranean. But we really need to be looking at the whole ecosystem, at those predator-prey interactions, at the food web, and at impacts on habitats. So instead of just looking at one fish, we need to look at it as a system. And we need to implement recovery measures for the collapsed fish populations. We have too many of those in Europe, and as a consequence, the ecosystems aren't functioning properly. And the Baltic Sea is a case point, of which there is a conference on today. And finally, we really need to drastically improve monitoring and control of all of our fishing activities, including for the bycatch of sensitive species and unwanted catches, which is continuing with huge impacts. And it's not, because of poor monitoring and control, it's neither quantified well enough nor managed well enough. And as a result, that's bad both for the ecosystem, but it's also bad for the fishing industry because, you know, it's difficult to defend a fisheries management system when you have hundreds of dolphins being killed each season or thousands of kilograms of fish being wasted still. And yeah, it's so much easier if we have good transparency and strong monitoring and control system. Next slide. So Dr. Sumaila stole my call the planet Ocean, because I love that. And in fact, this slide, there is no planet B, I've seen pop up in the last year and a half, particularly at rallies, at the Fridays for Future rallies. And it reminded me of 20 years ago or more, when I started being an activist as a young person. And the reason this really stands out to me is because it's more relevant now than ever. And yes, we're a planet of ocean, not a planet of Earth. So the ocean offers us a myriad of solutions, and without it, life would be unbearable. So we really just need to take those solutions. We need EU leaders to act honestly and courageously and put the needs and health of all Europeans in front of the interests of a few. And we need leadership that delivers on those promises that have already been made. So next slide. We would like to encourage everyone on this webinar, or watching this webinar, to help us to urge EU governments to end destructive overfishing and to protect the role of the ocean in addressing the biodiversity and climate crisis. You can sign our new petition, which has now over 9,000 supporters and signatures, at save.our.fish, and or follow us on social media. And I'm open for questions.
Thank you so much, Rebecca, and for making so clear what needs to be done, and also giving us something that we can all do right away, which is sign that petition. We've got some great questions from our participants, and I will go ahead and ask the first one. I think the question is probably for Dr. von Schuckmann, but if I'm wrong, just let me know. Does an increment in acidification in the ocean directly imply a reduction in the absorption of greenhouse gases? And which are the elements or components of the ocean responsible for producing oxygen?
So yes, the ocean is taking up 1/3 of the anthropogenic CO2 in the atmosphere. So it's a reduction. So it's also called a regulating service the ocean provides. So there are 4 major services provided by the ocean. So this regulating one, including the uptake of CO2, but also the uptake of heat, provisioning services, like, for example, fisheries, supporting services, like this life cycle, and cultural services, like recreation, tourism, etc. But of course, it has a mitigation effect, but the price is high we pay, because this is leading to ocean acidification and ocean warming, etc. For the elements for the production of oxygen, it's a primary production, photosynthesis.
Great, thank you for that answer. The next question, we've got 2 questions actually for Dr. Sumaila, and maybe I will pose them one at a time. They seem complicated to me, but maybe not as complicated to you, but I'll give them one at a time so that you can keep them straight. The first one is about carbon in whales. The questioner asks, you're probably familiar with the recent valuation that the IMF put on whales. What do you think of this method? And can you perceive how the result might be used by policymakers?
Yeah, so the IMF method is a reasonably good method. I mean, yeah, it's great. It's based on theory and understanding of economics and yeah, and the way this kind of studies is actually to highlight, you know, the contribution of life in the ocean on carbon sequestration. That this is a service that is valuable. So once you're able to convince policymakers, hopefully they will integrate it in their policies and then help us, you know, in that sense.
Great, thanks for that. And Dr. Sumaila, I'll give you the second question from the same questioner. It's about IUU fishing.
Yeah.
And the questioner says, the recent 73,000 hours of fishing done by the Chinese fleet at the boundary of the Galapagos horrified many of us. What can be done to apply pressure points on IUU? Where and how?
Yeah, IUU is it's a big issue, and as you have just alluded, you have boats from some countries going to other countries' waters and really essentially stealing the fish, and mostly it happens in the countries that don't have the ability or the power to really control and monitor their waters. So in those cases, we need a lot of international collaboration and action to really deal with this. We need to work together, because remember that we have only one global ocean. What happens in the Galapagos off there, or West Africa, or somewhere in Southeast Asia, affects everybody. So we have to live that. At the local level, what I advise smaller countries, like when you go to the Gulf of Guinea, there are about 16 countries fishing in that Gulf. It's one system, it's one ecosystem. So my advice is, you guys find a way to work together. You contribute, chip in, and together you have enough to be able to monitor and control your waters. Individually will not work. So there is those kinds of actions that can be taken. Yeah.
Thanks so much for that. The next question, I think, may be for Rebecca, but I think any of the three of you should feel free to come in. Other than establishing quotas to curb overfishing, what are the most effective policy approaches for fighting climate change and biodiversity loss?
I think each one of us could answer it. Certainly from our position, I mean, setting science-based fishing limits is an extremely effective policy in terms of fighting biodiversity loss. I mean, the IPCC report of 2019 made it clear that the biggest impact on ocean biodiversity was from fishing. So for sure, more selective fisheries, so fisheries methods that are most selective, that have minimum habitat damage, and that are set within scientific limits. And as I think Dr. Sumaila was just saying, you know, with really good monitoring and control to prevent illegal and unreported catches, that is extremely effective in terms of addressing biodiversity loss. But I think Dr. von Schuckmann and Dr. Sumaila might like to respond as well.
Yeah, Karina, you want to go, or should I? Okay. Yeah, I mean, there's a lot that can be done, and if you look at the literature, I alluded to some of it, like the policies, the economic policies, right? Don't use taxpayer money to reward overfishing or biodiversity depletion, or pumping out CO2. That's the first thing you do. Stop all the bad economics. We use economic instruments to help us achieve societal goals, like dealing with climate change, ensuring sustainability, not to undermine them. So that's one. And scientists have argued about using marine protected areas as insurance. Don't fish all over the place, because we make mistakes. And this led me and others to even advocate for closing the whole high seas to fishing. Just close the damn high seas, right? Because we don't get much, about 5 to 10%, the estimates. And when the fish go there, they get a break. I said, let's make the high seas the fish bank of the world, where the fish can have their piece, help us regenerate and feed the system. And that is socially also very beneficial, because at the moment, 7 top countries, big countries, take 70, 80% of all the values in the high seas when it is owned by the whole world. If you close the high seas, fish will migrate into the waters of Guinea-Bissau, for example, and they also get the benefit. And you don't pump too much CO2. So there are all those measures that are tough politically, but that we need to push our leaders to do.
Yeah. So underlining, of course, and I have just an addition, is also something which would also be an assessment in terms of fisheries management to induce an improvement in fisheries management due to a ecosystem approach, meaning that you would use a combination of environmental data to get a more holistic view on the change and the status and the variability in the environment, and to better inform management, fisheries management, establishing fish quota according to those changes from this very ecosystem approach, and to move with this on a sustainable approach as well. So today, often there are only single parameters used, and which are not sufficient to describe the system as a whole. So.
Thank you so much for that, to all three of you, for those very interesting answers. And I particularly like this concept of making the high seas the fish bank of the world. I think that's very powerful. A question just got bumped up to the top, so I'm going to give you that one, and it's for you, Dr. von Schuckmann. The questioner asks, your presentation is the first I've seen that highlights deoxygenation. It seems to be the forgotten component. Of course, it makes sense. Warmer water holds less oxygen. How much thought is being given to the cascade of negative effects that are likely to ensue? Where do you consider the greatest impact will take place? Coral reefs or productive cold seas, or brackish seas like the Baltic?
So I can give you a clear, direct answer, and also maybe a political accommodation. But because you have the impression that the oxygen is the forgotten parameter, is because there are only few data. So if you don't have data as a scientist, there's not much you can do about it. I mean, you do what you can. So this is a parameter. There is information, there are regional data, also like reports like IPCC is assessing the data available, but the evolution in terms of scientific knowledge is somehow a bit limited because of data gaps. So this is another big recommendation to be added, to have enough data to be able to monitor the system, and then to sufficiently improve our capabilities to also predict the system. And with both those tools, we are able to also better manage and go for a sustainable future.
Can I add a bit?
Of course.
Yeah, you know, yeah. So this is, and can you imagine how important oxygen is? And we don't know much, so we need a lot of effort. And I just want to let all the audience know that a group of us at UBC, we just got a reasonably big project to look at deoxygenation in the Pacific Ocean, right? From Alaska right down to Chile, because actually so far the information is saying that it's a hot spot for this. Because the oxygen levels are already low. So if you take it further, it's gonna be catastrophic. So we just started the project with scientists from Canada, US, and Chile working on this now. So hopefully we'll start plugging the gaps, you know. Plugging. Thank you.
Okay,
Thank you both. Oh yeah, no, sorry.
Just sorry, because I didn't reply to the second part on where, for example, for Europe as well, also there are some specific results. For example, also there's a new project which is called Argo, having a lot of biochemical, also oxygen sensors on board. So you have regular measurements. And based on this, and also historically related, there's, for example, a strong deoxygenation observed, for example, in the Black Sea time series. So there are many areas. So this is one of the hotspots also on the European scale.
Great.
Great, thank you both for that. The next question, I think perhaps any of you could answer, although I think it does chime with something that you said, Dr. Sumaila, when you were talking about subsidies. Could we speak about the role of a relatively small number of corporations that inflict the overwhelming majority of the damage being inflicted on marine environments? Any thoughts about this?
Yeah, so there is a group at the Stockholm Resilience Center. I think that this is a group that really studies this, the role of corporations on our oceans and the fisheries sector. They're doing amazing work, and one of their papers actually said about 6-8 companies take most of the fish from the ocean. So if somebody's interested in that, just go to the Stockholm Resilience Center, and they have publications. It's amazing what they are doing there. Yeah. So, but you are right. It's almost like any sector. If you start looking deep, it's just a small number that does most of the damage, or not, or good actually sometimes. So yeah.
If I may cut in here, Adam, I think that is that question also relates to a couple of the other questions, in the sense that, yeah, there are some really big fishing industries that own many other fishing companies, and then, you know, within one body can end up controlling vast quantities of the quota of a whole country for a specific fish. And we've seen that in a number of places. And I think that what happens is that sometimes people look at fishing, or they talk about fishing and fishermen or the fishing industry, but the whole industry is not equal. It's not the same thing. It's extremely different and diverse. And you go from having these small coastal, low impact fishes right up to these massive industrial scale fishes that operate across the entire globe, that are practically billion-dollar companies. And that's a pretty vast difference. And unfortunately, the way that the system is set up, as with many things in the world, unfortunately, maybe one of the reasons why we are in this situation, that actually, you know, a lot of the quota control does, a lot of the access does go to the biggest, most profitable, most influential companies. And we could actually really have a very sustainable, both environmentally and socially sustainable system of fisheries management, where you get more equitability, more access, and you get more benefits both from the environment and society. And we actually have, again, some of those, the rules, or some of the policies in place that could do that already in the EU. And I think someone's question was around the UK and Brexit and whatnot. But actually, you know, capacity already exists. If a government wants to do it, they can already start the process of making that access more equitable across the industry, so that we get more social and environmental benefits as well.
Thank you for that, Rebecca. Yes, and indeed, I think you've caught the two other questions that were coming up, which is about companies and about the large trawlers that we see around the UK. So thank you for that. I'll just move on to the next question, as we've got a few more minutes still. Whilst the scientific community is resolute on preventing climate change, do we have any information on the feelings of fishing communities and their views towards climate change?
Yeah, so as always, there are diverse views, right? I mean, about climate change, as you can see all over. Yeah, some don't think it's serious, and it's a hoax and all that. You know, the big stories about that. But there are many that are aware and very concerned. I mean, in BC here, we have a group that they call themselves the Young Fishermen Association. I tell them they should change it to Young Fishers Association, right? And it's a group I like very much, because these are mostly young people fishing, but also the elderly ones who care about this. And their goal is to do smart fishing, to do fishing that is based on science, that is sustainable, so they can, and also improve and add value in the fish they catch, so they have a decent income. And they certainly believe in climate change, and they see what is happening to them. So it's a diverse set of. But if I'm to guess, the majority really believe that climate change is making their life harder and more difficult.
Thank you for that, and I do hope they change their name. It sounds like a great group. We've got, I think, just one last question, which I think is a very interesting and important one. How could we, as fish consumers, without the help of markets in the economy, make our governments and institutions apply all those measures to prevent overfishing? And I might add a slant on it. How could we, even if we're not fish consumers? But feel free to answer it as you like. And to any of you, sorry, it's not directed to anyone in particular.
Rebecca,
Please go ahead, Dr. Sumaila.
oh, I thought Rebecca might want to do something here.
Thanks, Rashid. Yes, I think that I think the main thing is to send a direct message to the government that we want them to stop overfishing. I mean, we have to show them that there is public support for this, because they get messages from the industry all the time that they need to keep doing, you know, what they've been doing, or there's, you know, requests for more fishing. So it's really important that as consumers of fish, or even just breathers of air or the public, because actually fish are a public resource. So it's not even if you eat the fish, actually the fish are a public resource, which is a thing that we often forget. You know, so they're being managed, they're being fished on behalf of the public. So we have both a right and a responsibility like anybody else. So I think as fish consumers, one, you can try to, yes, choose sustainably caught fished and make those kind of consumer-based decisions, get as much information as possible, and make informed decisions with what you eat. But of course, also giving messages to both, you know, companies on that level, but also your government, that this is an issue you care about. This is an issue that is more important than just supporting an industry. It's actually something that we all care about, and then it's for the well-being of all citizens. Because what really is common is that politically people think that fish are only important to the fishing industry or people who eat fish. And what I think Karina and Rashid have really clearly demonstrated is that that's not true. Fish are actually really important to a healthy ocean, and we all need a healthy ocean. So that would be my response.
This is great, Rebecca. You've touched on everything. The only thing I'll add is that, you know, write to the supermarket that you visit often. Write to them. It's amazing what little letters can do. Write to them and tell them you want to eat only sustainable fish. Write to your members of parliament. And ultimately, please vote. And when you vote, don't forget your home, the environment. This is our habitat. Without it, we are gone, please. So these are just little ones to add to the amazing answer Rebecca gave.
Thank you so much. We've only got 1 minute left. There was one last question, but I think, to be honest, the two of you just answered it beautifully. The question was whether equity, fairness, and just actions prosper given the power dynamics that we live in, and what would be needed to change these dynamics, which is a very big question for just a few seconds left. But I think that you've given us some powerful tools that we can use as people, not just people eating fish or catching fish, but people who depend on the ocean for our health and the future of our planet, that we can use to change these power dynamics. I want to say thank you to the three speakers, Karina von Schuckmann, Rashid Sumaila, and Rebecca Hubbard. I think you have made an incredibly powerful case as to why combating overfishing is a key aspect to combating climate change. And I think that all of us here are very grateful to you, because you've given us the tools to go out and make that argument in our working lives, in our personal lives. And hopefully, as the work to combat climate change continues, people will see the importance of the ocean, and particularly the importance of combating overfishing as a critical part of that work. So thank you all so much.
Thank you so much, Adam. Amazing. Yeah. Thanks to
everybody.
And thanks, Karina and Rashid.
Keep pushing for a healthy ocean. All right.